that occurred to me that I should perhaps ask that. But anyhow, let me share my slides with you if I can. In the meantime, you will lose my sight from what I know from my lectures. And there we are. I think you can see my slides, right? Are my slides visible?
Yes, hocam, görülüyor.
Okay, cool. I'm never certain of that. So this is the title of my slides, of my talk. And let me begin with a number of definitions, as is customary. So these are the definitions that I make up for this particular talk. And this does not necessarily refer to ultimate truth or anything. So we are talking about age of algorithmic propaganda. So I thought it would be wise to define age. To me, age is an extensive period of time dominated by a certain discursive modality. And since I'm going to be talking about computability, I'd like to define that as well. Actually, I took it from Wikipedia. Wikipedia defines computability, ability to solve a problem in an effective manner. Effective manner is an important phrase. It means the use of an algorithm. So what is an algorithm? And this definition is mine. I call an algorithm the displacement of reason, i.e. reason leaving the subject. So I will be speaking in terms of philosophy of mind perspective and from a technology perspective. So let me define technological advancement for all else. So I define technological advancement as an activity of reason resulting in a novel way of solving a problem. Not the invention of a device, a good or a service, or not only the skill, method, or technique, but a shift in reasoning. So I will be, in my talk, I will be hovering around these notions in a historical perspective. So I have threefold aims. First of all, I would like to discuss the conceptual roots of subject-mind couple through a ground historical tour. And I also would like to illustrate the ways in which mind reasoning and human subject couple has a funny tidal relationship, on and off relationship, maybe. And finally, I would like to illustrate the presence of a desire to dissociate reasoning from the human subject. So, as I said, as my title indicates, I will be talking about the political subject, or I'm supposed to talk about political subject. I should start by saying that it's a precarious topic, especially when we consider the complexities involved in the notion of subject in general. So my aim today is not to dig the dirt around the notion, nor do I intend to reconsider its philosophical, historical, or linguistic constituents. Actually, I'd like to remind our colleagues and students a few historical breaking points from a philosophy of mind or history of technology perspective. And in the end, I'll be asking a question that I think has a significance in terms of the future of subjecthood in the age of algorithms. From a pragmatic point of view, although politicality fits very well to the traditional doer, speaker, thinker qualities of the subject, the adjective political does not ease off the difficulties surrounding the notion. In the context of politics, the exertion of power and being the target of exerted power are the prime predicates of the subject. Here, I'd like to quote an Iranian colleague, Sadiq Rahimi, to fortify my observation. He says, and I quote, "The subject is conceived of as political in its very subjectivity, both in the sense that it engages in an ongoing act of subjugating and conjugating the world into meaningful patterns, and in the sense that the subject is continuously subjugated and conjugated by the local meaning system. Politicality in this sense is not an added aspect of the subject, but indeed the mode of being of the subject, that is, precisely what the subject is." Unquote. In other words, no matter how complicated the matter of subject is, one thing is certain. Subjecthood is political and politics is about the subject. A delicate nuance in Rahimi's quote is about the nonlinear and symmetrical operating principle of the subject. Subject in this context is both the source and the target of the political. This means that the subject is constitutive of political actions as much as it is constituted by what it partly constitutes. From an expanded definition of the political, subject alone cannot be considered as the ultimate maker of anything. Here, we need to dive deep into the so-called inside of the subject, into the very mechanism which affords or which paves the way for such a non-linear operation. The mechanism is called the human mind. Here we have yet another extremely contentious notion, along with, of course, consciousness, which I will omit from my discussion. Our conference title is Political Communication in the Age of Algorithmic Propaganda, and understanding the age from a temporal within should be admittedly a very difficult task. Following Merlin Donald, we can say that no mental activity, including understanding, is a solo one. In Origins of the Modern Mind, Donald developed a sophisticated theory of the cognitive evolution, which asserts that the human representational structures work in close collaboration with the cultural environment. The philosophical translation of this statement is that the human mind is incapable of producing thoughts on its own or by itself. Thoughts, including thoughts about our cultural and political environment, are neither generic nor aseptic products of mind. They are, instead, collective in the sense that they unavoidably involve physical and social determinants that constitute the cultural makeup of our so-called age. So here we are. We'd like to produce thoughts about our age, defined specifically for this meeting as the age of algorithmic propaganda or computational propaganda. We certainly can do that, but with an important point to constantly keep in mind. What we call human mind is embedded in the representational structures in the very general sense put by Donald, as well as in the immediate sense in which it constantly engages with them. So understanding the age is concordant with understanding the human mind and the cognitive representational structures it is embedded in. Political subject in this context, as the supposed bearer of mind and consciousness, cannot be taken as something essential, that is, devoid of historical constitution. On the other hand, a rough historical analysis would reveal that the subject has not always been the authentic house of the mind. This is why I prefer the phrase supposed bearer. For subject, as I said, is not the owner of the ultimate source of mental activity. Let's put the subject in historical perspective and try to observe the status of subject as the habitat of mind. But before all else, let me state one point. I do not take mind as the unique and exclusive quality of humankind. From a widened conceptual perspective, I see no meaningful evidence locating mind exclusively in the human person, except the evidence provided the human mind itself. Nor do I attribute any particular importance to mind when it comes to the notion of humanity. For example, gravitational force seems to me to be way too important than mind for humanity, isn't it? Or the problem of sustainability, understood as carrying humankind and the entire ecosystem that it is a part of to an unpredictable future without inflicting irreversible damages on them, is again way too important than mind or political subjecthood. However, trying to understand the age or the political subject without placing the human mind into the equation is a feasible project. On the contrary, the acknowledgement of the mind as the locus of human subject is, for instance, the very concession that produced the problem of sustainability itself. So in the history of human thought, this relationship has been strongly explained thanks to the concept of instrumental reason. And we know that the strongest arguments on instrumentalization of reason disseminated from Frankfurt School thinkers. So let's hear Herbert Marcuse. He says, I quote, Reason is the fundamental category of philosophical thought, the only one by means of which it has bound itself to human destiny. Philosophy wanted to discover the ultimate and most general grounds of being, and under the name of reason, it conceived the idea of authentic being in which all significant antitheses of subject and object, essence and appearance, thought and being were reconciled. Well, the Frankfurt School attachment to reason was conditional, though. As clearly stated by Horkheimer, Marcuse, and many others, although reason under capitalism appeared in a distorted fashion, the hope attached to it as the prime quality of political and emancipatory subject was never given up. Well, earlier, in a letter to the German philosopher and political commentator Arnold Ruge, Karl Marx himself would say, reason has always existed, but not always in rational form. Thus, I would conclude that the observation of the trajectory of human mind and reason is not a dispensable attitude, since it is seen as the ultimate resolution of the impasse of Cartesian thought space, or in Marcuse's terms, the sole reconciliatory tool for Cartesian antitheses like subject and object or essence and appearance. Needless to say, the impasse produced by the tension between these antitheses did not suddenly emerge in the time of René Descartes. Let's rewind back about 2.5 millennia and have a look at the ancient Greek understanding of human mind, particularly human reasoning. In Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle singles out human being as the only animal having the ability to create rational thoughts, thus the phrase rational animal. In a similar fashion, in De Anima, deliberative imagination is considered to be the defining feature of humans, not in the sense that all humans are rational, but that they have the capacity to be rational. In this approach, we clearly see the locating of thought-producing faculty in the human subject, it being used or not. And perhaps the philosopher who should really attract our attention is Pythagoras, who famously stated that all is number. This is a short quote. Back in 6th century BCE, all is number is a striking dictum in the sense that it reflects the inception of a certain mode of thought. In this, we can see the root formulation of computability. If calling it the initial formulation of artificial intelligence would be too far-fetched exaggeration. But nevertheless, we should also know that computability itself is what makes AI a plausible idea. In the history of Western thought, notwithstanding significant exceptions like Thomas Aquinas, the Middle Ages are usually formulated as a period when reason is suspended in favor of the heavenly order. Britannica describes the situation quite dramatically. With reference to ancient Greek philosophers, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the encyclopedia states that nothing comparable in importance to their thought appeared in rationalistic philosophy in the next 1800 years. Though the work of St. Thomas Aquinas was an impressive attempt to blend Greek rationalism and Christian revelation into a single harmonious system. In the context of my discussion, the description that nothing important appeared in about 18 centuries is an important phrasing. I'd like to ask, where did the thinking potential go during these centuries? What happened to reason? Of course, the individuals did not stop thinking in this period, nor did they stop ratiocination. I'd like to suggest that thinking during the so-called Dark Ages, in quotes, has left subjects with an upwards move. Without complicating the matter even further, I will describe what happened as a dislocation or displacement of reason from human subjects and its submission to a different order. There is no doubt that the working of human reason persisted, but to quote Marx again, in an irrational way. The reason why I prefer to construct such a binary of rational and irrational is to direct the attention to metaphysical rather than historical observation. Through this observation, I see the first major move of an oscillation with regard to the location of mind in accordance with the subject. Following an earlier analogy used in this paper, it is almost like the human subject has left its role of supposed bearer or stopped being the habitat of thinking capacity. Let's move forward a bit and let me continue to trace the idea of reason in relation to the subject. And let me read from Thomas Hobbes this time. He says, I quote, "By reasoning, I understand computation. And to compute is to collect the sum of many things added together at the same time, or to know the remainder when one thing has been taken from another. To reason, therefore, is the same as to add or to subtract." I will come in the very end of my paper back to this quote again. Please note that when speaking of adding and subtracting, Hobbes does not mention arithmetic of numbers. He is actually talking about the entirety of reasoning. In this respect, if thinking is idea producing, complex ideas are thought to be produced by the adding of simple ideas. He says, a proposition is, in a sense, formed by adding the name of the predicate to the name of the subject. So by adding snow and white, we get snow is white. This manner of thinking occupies a significant space in the 17th century philosophy. The notion of clear and distinct ideas by René Descartes might be a commonplace in the standard narrative of the Cartesian age, but we should remember that there is much more to Descartes' desire. The search for a universal language which would employ mathematical certainty is a widespread motive in the late 16th and 17th centuries. Well, Leibniz, for example, as the prime name in this context, criticized Hobbes, who conspired a relation between reasoning and calculation, for not taking advantage of mathematics enough. For Leibniz, this has led him into paralogisms. Let me read a few quotes from Leibniz to illustrate how committed he was to the Pythagorean dictum of numbers. He says, I quote, "The only way to rectify our reasonings is to make them as tangible as those of the mathematicians, so that we can find our error at a glance, and when there are disputes among persons, we can simply say, let's calculate, without further ado, in order to see who is right." Leibniz imagines a device that would employ words themselves rather than numbers, and describes the existence of such a device as a feat which would be of incredible utility for human life. In his words, we can see how frustrated he was for such a device has not been discovered. However, this frustration lifts in another less elegant road in his terms that he suggests. Actually, the inventor of differential equations and integral calculation, with Isaac Newton, defines the field of mathematical logic in the following words. The road open to us consists of making use, as mathematicians do, of characters which are appropriate to fix our ideas and of adding to them a numerical proof. Hobbes, Descartes, Leibniz, Pascal, to name another, all these examples involving mathematization of human mind is abound in the 17th century. Following the Middle Ages, we see a turning back of reason into the habitat of subject, this time with a downwards move. An important point to register is that the mathematization of mind does not make a serious distinction between the verbal content and formal structures in the 17th century. To put it in a more straightforward manner, we can say that mathematization, or in contemporary terms, calculability of the mind, almost automatically downgrades meaning content in favor of its formal quality. Let's remember snow is white example by Hobbes. According to Hobbes, once we add mathematically snow and white, the auxiliary verb is comes naturally and can be eliminated. The is was considered to be an excess despite its apparent constitutive role in terms of meaning. Just subject and predicate are deemed to be enough for the mathematical operation of addition, thus the trade-off of the is. In other words, mathematization of mind and language in the case of Leibniz is the main thing. Note that the movement of reason as the prime product of human mind does not alter the underlying desire for mathematical certainty, which emerge with varying motivations. These motivations depend on the historical age. It could be attachment to numbers, the search for indisputable truth, or as it is in our age, the exactitude of representation. The problem of meaning, which remained in the shadow of computation, would be suspended altogether when we arrive 20th century. For this, we need to observe yet another movement of reason off the subject, this time vertically and in all directions. In this third move, I consider information theory, particularly the mathematical theory of communication by Claude Shannon, and the theories of effective calculability. For the latter, there are a bunch of genius scientists to mention, but the name Alan Turing, of course, sticks out with good reason. Let's talk about the former. In the very beginning of his groundbreaking article, The Mathematical Theory of Communication, Claude Shannon makes an interesting remark. He says, and I quote, frequently the messages have meaning. That is, they refer to or are correlated according to some system with certain physical or conceptual entities. He means the world and language, of course. These semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant to the engineering problem. The engineering problem to be solved is that of reproducing at one point, either exactly or approximately, a message selected at another point. Now I'd like to conclude my historical tour with two contemporary examples which strikingly resonate with all the examples from Pythagoras to Hobbes that I mentioned. In recent times, the perspective I am discussing is classified as the computational theory of mind, or CTM for short. My first example is from David Davenport, a colleague from Bilkent University, Computer Science Department. Let me quote him. He says, "Does computation, an abstract notion lacking semantics and real-world interaction, offer a suitable basis for explaining cognition?" The answer would appear to be yes. Indeed, it would seem to offer the only possible explanation. I'd like to question the level of certainty in this proposition. How can we be so sure that computation is the only possible explanation of the working of human mind? Actually, we know the conceptual reason behind such a certainty, and we need to check with Alan Turing for that. Of course, knowing the reason does not automatically require that we should be in agreement with this proposition. Alan Turing is generally considered to be the person who has imagined the working principles of contemporary computers. With his imaginary Turing machine, he has not only found the solution to Hilbert's decision problem, but also put forth a very strong thesis along with Alonzo Church, known as Turing-Church thesis on computability. There are multiple versions of the same thesis, variations originating from using alternate terminologies or summarizing the original. But basically the thesis, which is actually a hypothesis, states, this actually is not a quote from Turing, it's an explanation, states that a function on the natural numbers can be calculated by an effective method, that is by the use of an algorithm, if and only if, and that is important, I underline that, if and only if it is computable by a Turing machine. At first sight, this hypothesis might sound like a strictly mathematical one. However, it certainly has a very strong implication on the philosophy of mind. In fact, the hypothesis describes calculability as a non-human process because it, in a sense, reverses the order and defines the human mental ability to employ an effective method as a function of machine calculability. In other words, The hypothesis says that to calculate something, you do not need humans. When humans do calculate, they are not human subjects anymore. They are indistinguishable from machines. So let me finish by reading a final quote from a contemporary AI textbook. And I'm about to stop. I quote, "The Church-Turing thesis cannot be proved, but it is a hypothesis that has stood the test of time. No one has built a machine that has carried out computation that cannot be computed by a Turing machine. There is no evidence also that people can compute functions that are not Turing computable. An agent's actions are a function of its abilities, its history, and its goals or preferences. This provides an argument that computation is more than just a metaphor for intelligence." And this part is very striking. The authors say, reasoning is computation, and computation can be carried out by a computer. So let me ask my final question that I promised in the very beginning. What would be the reason's next move? If, of course, it moves again at all. And my hope and expectation is that it would turn back to human subjects in the plural. And I also hope that in such a move, it produces ideas involving a very strong emphasis on sustainability. Thank you very much for your patience, and that is my talk. So let me turn back to Zoom and stop share.
Thank you, Hocam.
How did we do time-wise? Wow.
Oh, great.
Too long.
I think, according to my clock, only 2 minutes, which is all right.
All right.
Okay. So now,
thank you very much.
Go ahead, Hocam.
No, I'm just, I don't think we have time to take questions, do we?
Maybe at the end, yeah. I mean, throughout, not now, but yeah. So, without any further delay, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Samuel Wooley. He's a writer, researcher, and professor with a focus on emerging media technologies and propaganda. His work looks at how automation, algorithms, and AI are leveraged for both freedom and control. His recent book, The Reality Game: How the Next Wave of Technology Will Break the Truth, explores the future of digital disinformation across virtual reality, video, and other media tools. Crucially, it provides a pragmatic roadmap for how society can respond. Dr. Wooley is an assistant professor in the School of Journalism at the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas, Austin. He is a Knight Faculty Fellow and the Program Director of Propaganda Research at the Center for Media Engagement at the University of Texas. His academic work has appeared in numerous academic publications, including the Journal of Information Technology and Politics, the International Journal of Communication, the Routledge Handbook of Media, Conflict and Security, A Network Self, Platforms, Stories, Connections, and The Political Economy of Robots. He has written for popular venues including The Atlantic, Wired, The Guardian, Motherboard Vice, and TechCrunch. His research has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, and on Today, 60 Minutes, and Frontline. Dr. Wooley, we are honored to have you here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Erkan. Thank you for having me.